Welcome everybody. We'll get started here in just a minute. I'm Johnny Vasic with the Executive Director with Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. And I appreciate everybody joining us today. We have gathered some of our board of directors, which happen to be all doctors today, to talk about the mosquito pesticide spraying on the west side. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Brian Moench, our founder and board president.
Thank you, Johnny. Everybody hear me okay? All right, good. So I'm Dr. Brian Moench, president of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. And I'm here today with several members of our board of directors on behalf of the 450 physician members of our group and our 3,000 citizen members. We want to address the problem of aerial spraying of pesticides by the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District over a large area in the northwestern quadrant of Salt Lake. But let me first put this issue in a larger context. Public exposure to atmospheric radiation, air pollution, lead, mercury, secondhand cigarette smoke, asbestos, military burn pits, PCBs, and countless other toxic chemicals continued in many cases for decades after the science was clear that these were causing death and disease. We are in that situation now with pesticides. Public policy is badly lagging behind the science, and great harm is being done that shouldn't be and doesn't have to be. The term mosquito abatement refers to numerous strategies to control mosquitoes, some of which are benign, but some are definitely not. When it comes to spraying pesticides, the term abatement is a euphemism, and we should not let that term obscure the fact that this is a practice that spreads biologic poison throughout our environment. For just about every human on Earth, pesticides now contaminate our air, drinking water, food, and soil. They are detected on Mount Everest, in the deepest parts of the ocean, and in rainfall from the sky. The logical extension is now well documented. Pesticides are universally found in the blood and urine of almost all human beings everywhere, in amniotic fluid, newborn babies, and in domestic drinking water worldwide. A study of contaminants in human breast milk from multiple countries found every milk sample from every country was contaminated with the most common mosquito pesticide and at levels high enough to cause neurologic and endocrine effects. This is one of the exact same pesticides that the district in Salt Lake plans to spray from airplanes over Salt Lake City's northwest quadrant. While the problem and the contamination is global, for Salt Lake Valley residents, the most important place to reduce chemical usage is in the valley itself. With this as a background, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment have had serious concerns about what might be done in an attempt to control mosquito population in the area of the inland port, ever since the port first emerged from the legislature in 2018. However, in February, we became alarmed that the district was proposing to involve the U.S. Air Force in aerial spraying over 43,000 acres. That proposal has been withdrawn by the district after widespread public opposition. However, the bulk of the problem remains, and the problem is much worse than we thought. It turns out the district has been aerial spraying pesticides for decades, over an area 4 times larger than that, more than 160,000 acres, using private contractors and small airplanes, and they intend to continue that this year. This is a practice that is an institutionalized relic of the 1950s. And the evidence is very strong that it is hazardous to public health, not protective. It is as inappropriate as atmospheric nuclear testing. And in fact, there is significant overlap in the health consequences of these two kinds of toxins. Utahns should not tolerate being made downwinder victims of another type of atmospheric contaminant. In recent years, numerous medical experts and entire medical societies have made strong position statements regarding the danger to humans of even small doses of toxic chemicals like pesticides, and their link to obesity, cancer, heart disease, birth defects, reproductive pathology, and neurologic and brain disorders. Animal studies show that by damaging DNA, pesticides can even harm the health of future generations. I will give a brief summary of the reasons why the practice must stop, and then members of our board will expand on those reasons. Number one, pesticides in general, including those used by the district, represent a widespread risk to human health, even at low doses, especially for fetuses and infants. At the top of a long list of health concerns is neurotoxicity, including increasing the risk of autism. Utah has one of the highest rates of autism in the nation, afflicting 1 in every 32 Utah boys. Our community leaders should be doing everything they can to reduce that risk. Instead, we are ignoring environmental exposures like air pollution and pesticides that research clearly indicates are among many toxins that contribute to this often debilitating disorder. For this 60-page report, we reviewed the findings of over 200 studies. I will mention just one study presented to the American Academy of Pediatrics that most closely approximates our situation in Salt Lake City. A statistical study found that aerial spraying with just one of the 2 pesticides used by the Salt Lake City district was associated with an increase in rates of autism of 37% in zip codes in New York that were within 2.5 kilometers of aerial spraying. Number 2, the VOCs volatilized from pesticide spraying contribute notably to local air pollution. Number 3, spraying is no longer effective in reducing mosquito populations for multiple reasons. Chief among them, mosquito resistance and the evolution of super mosquitoes. The district even admits spraying has lost its effectiveness. Mosquitoes from sprayed areas can tolerate up to 10 times the amount of pesticide as mosquitoes from non-sprayed areas. The end result is an arms race of toxic chemicals that inevitably fails, and mosquito populations actually increase. Number 4, we must not allow a cure worse than the disease. The incidence of severe outcomes from West Nile virus is so low that preventing those outcomes should not be allowed to eclipse the long list of other health and environmental concerns from pesticide use. In fact, spraying does not reduce the incidence of West Nile virus. Number 5, claims of safety for pesticide spraying use faulty logic and outdated faulty science, while ignoring virtually all the research in the medical literature on the issue. Furthermore, these chemicals can travel far off-site, exposing virtually everyone in the Salt Lake Valley and beyond. Number 6, pesticide spraying has adverse impacts on beneficial insects, bird populations, wildlife, the ecosystem of the Great Salt Lake, and beyond. And number 7, there are better, safer, and more effective ways to control mosquitoes. I'll now turn it over to Dr. John McFarland.
Good morning. As a neurosurgeon, I'm concerned about the human central nervous system. As a parent of 4 children, I'm concerned about their health and well-being. I want to understand why 2 of my children have asthma and why 1 of them is on the autistic spectrum. I want to do everything I can to help them and help avoid these problems in the future. The primary and most consistent human effect of insecticide exposure is neurotoxicity. That's hardly a surprise given their origin as nerve agent chemical weapons. Syria has used them just in the last several years. In fact, Syria has used something that is akin to one of the agents that is being used in this current spraying. Pyrethroids have been around for 40 years. DDT is a pyrethroid, and the main metabolites of these agents have been detected in urine samples from the general population all around. Pesticides and pyrethroids are toxic to the brain. They're especially important in brain development. Loss of intellect and behavioral disorders in children occur with even exposure to very small amounts of these pyrethroids. It's comparable to the DDT, these pyrethroids, even the ones that are currently used. There's an incidence of spraying after Hurricane Floyd where this spraying was done on Long Island, and 90% of the lobsters died because of this spraying. And these smaller invertebrates, it was toxic to them, and it's toxic as well to the human fetus, to the development of the human fetus. It has toxic effects on neurotransmitters, how we receive signals in the brain, the important blood-brain barrier that goes from the bloodstream to the brain, that without which the brain is susceptible to a lot more exposure from the rest of the body. And neurobehavior is affected by even small exposure to these agents. The pyrethroids cause neuroinflammation, damage to the glial cell functions, which are critical to the immune system and protection of the brain. So besides the pyrethroids, the other agent used is NAILID, which is an organophosphate, just like sarin gas. Organophosphate pesticides cause permanent damage to cognition, including information processing and working memory. There was a study done where they tested urinary levels of these organophosphate metabolites in pregnant mothers. Then the children that they gave birth to were tested at age 7. In those mothers who were the highest 20% of exposure to the organophosphates, they had an average IQ deficit of 7 points compared to the other groups. So it's associated with delayed mental milestones in 2-year-olds, decreased nonverbal IQ, and the US Congress produced a report clear back in 1990 talking about malathion, which is also an organophosphate. It can damage the nervous system after just one exposure, and it requires an incredibly small amount to lead to these primitive reflex destruction, mental and motor delays among preschoolers, decreases in working and visual memory, processing speed, verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, and IQ among elementary school age children. So as a parent, as a neurosurgeon, we don't need to expose our children to even infinitesimal amounts of these agents because of their toxicity to the brain, especially in this state where we have the highest birth rate in the nation and we're trying to protect our mothers and our children. Dr. Kirtley Jones is with us and she's going to talk to us now.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Kirtley Parker Jones, and I'm a board member of UPHE, endocrinologist with a specialty in reproductive medicine and fertility. And I have a background in research in male and female infertility and have contributed to research on environmental factors in infertility. Humans have been trying to decrease their exposure to mosquitoes for a long time, and the use of pesticides, including DDT, which was commonly used in the 1950s, has unfortunate consequences for humans and other species, including lower sperm counts in humans and neurologic development in children. As a child living in Sparks, Nevada, I was regularly DDT sprayed by a mobile truck during the summer. We were told by the town when the spraying would occur, and my mother would bring us all inside and shut the windows, but it was summer and we would run outside to play in the grass as soon as the truck passed. I can remember this body undoubtedly still has remnants of DDT, and DDT is now banned in the US because of its consequences. The proposed extensive spraying of insecticides over the Great Salt Lake wetlands for the purposes of mosquito abatement is problematic. The combination of chemicals to be used have evidence of significant reproductive toxicity, especially in the domain of male infertility. Men exposed to pyrethroids either by occupational exposure or environmental exposure have lower sperm counts and age. This research would apply to men who are employees of the Mosquito Abatement District and men who live and work in the Wasatch Front. Men who've been exposed to organophosphate insecticides also have abnormalities in function. More importantly, exposure to the combination of pyrethroids and organophosphates together at low levels, as proposed by the district plan, is more toxic to human sperm production. The consequences of sperm counts and DNA abnormalities can lead to lowered fertility and increased miscarriages in the partners of men exposed. This is heartbreaking for couples trying to have a child. Also of great concern, as mentioned by Dr. McFarland, is the possible toxicity of these products to the developing child. The presence of these insecticides in the urine of pregnant women has been associated with increased risk of neurologic problems in the developing child in some studies. The precautionary principle in public health comes to take great care in exposing persons to chemicals that might cause harm when the benefit is not clear, as is the case of widespread spraying of insecticides for mosquito abatement in Salt Lake County. We need to protect our men. We need to protect the people who live in the county if the benefit is not really worth the risk. Thank you. I'm going to hand this off to Courtney Henley, who's an ER physician who will be talking to us more about the issue of spraying.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, my mute button went missing there for a moment. My name is Dr. Courtney Henley. I'm actually an anesthesiologist. We do have emergency physicians with Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. And no problem, Dr. Jones. I started getting concerned in public health when I became a physician in 1999. And I realized that part of my duty to my community is to further the goals of public health. And then I became really interested in the future of our world when I had kids in 2006, right about when Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment became an organization. And, you know, as a mom, I feel like it's my duty to leave this world a better place than I found it for my children and for their generation. And that's why I'm here. So my colleagues have addressed the connection between pesticides and neurologic dysfunction and reproductive dysfunction. Let me just reemphasize that 2/3 of the risk for autism comes from exposure to the cumulative effects of numerous environmental toxins. This is well demonstrated in the scientific evidence. And these are the very pesticides that are being sprayed by the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District. Alluding, Dr. Mitch mentioned the New York study that suggests extrapolated to Salt Lake City's northwest quadrant, where we're going to need to do a lot of spraying in those wetlands. North Salt Lake and West Bountiful, at least 77 cases of autism and perhaps many more are due solely to the aerial spraying of these mosquito pesticides. Okay, so the pesticides definitely cause neurologic dysfunction. Now let's look at the other side of the issue. One of the reasons that the Mosquito Abatement District wants to spray pesticides is because mosquitoes carry different viruses. West Nile virus, West equine encephalitis, that's a virus, and St. Louis encephalitis. There has never ever been an outbreak of St. Louis encephalitis in Utah. The last outbreak of West equine encephalitis was in 1958. Last year, the number of cases of West Nile virus in the entire state was 2 with no deaths. Since 2008, the average annual number of cases of West Nile virus in Utah has been 12. And in most years, the number of cases is in the single digits, with only 1 West Nile virus related death every 5 years. Experts predicted that cases in the US would decrease throughout the decades as West Nile virus became endemic since it first arrived in 1999. And that's exactly what has occurred. Since 2002, nationally, death rates from West Nile virus have dropped 80%. So the take home there is that these viruses, West Nile virus and similar viruses carried by mosquitoes, are just not a significant threat to the public health of our communities. So does aerial spraying of pesticides reduce that already barely significant threat? 3 lines of evidence suggest that the answer is no. Number 1, in a study of communities that sprayed for mosquitoes and others that did not, researchers found that the rates of West Nile virus was actually higher in the communities that sprayed the pesticides compared to others. Number 2, Utah statistics show that cases of West Nile virus no longer track mosquito populations. They are significantly less than they were a decade ago, even though maybe we have more people near more mosquitoes with the development on wetlands. Number 3, the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District concedes in their environmental assessment, and I'm quoting here, numbers of mosquitoes do not decrease after aerial adulticide operations are conducted. And I guess that's why they think they need to spray more, farther, and wider. I just want to give you a personal story. Similar to Dr. Jones, when I was growing up, the truck would drive down my street spraying pesticides out of it. And, you know, moms would go, kids come inside, everybody stay inside. They're spraying the pesticides on the street and it would smell really bad. Even if you were inside, it was really unpleasant. That was in the 1970s. And I'll tell you, that was in North Florida, which has got to be the mosquito capital of the world. I mean, they are everywhere all the time. And the bottom line is they don't spray anymore because it never helped. It's unpleasant, the odor. It causes neurologic dysfunction. It causes reproductive dysfunction. It causes immunosuppression, and it just doesn't help. So we no longer spray for mosquitoes in the mosquito capitals of the world. Okay, we don't spray for adult mosquitoes. I mentioned, and I just want to emphasize, pesticides suppress the immune system, and that is a Pandora's box of many, many things that we probably haven't even discovered go wrong. Immunosuppression is one of the primary risk factors for a serious outcome of West Nile virus. Some experts believe that pesticide exposure may actually increase the risk of long-term neurologic disability or death from West Nile virus because of this immunosuppression and the terrible interactions there. So these claims of pesticide safety, they use faulty logic and faulty science. I mean, pesticides are extremely toxic to all forms of life. That is the bottom line. Under the current approval processes for the proposed aerial pesticides that the district wants to spray, a chemical is typically approved for use as long as it isn't lethal to animals, which includes humans, after exposure to unrealistically large doses of the product. So that's how these things get EPA approval. But what if an individual is exposed to small doses over and over, year after year? And what if the individual is exposed to numerous toxic agents, like the numerous ones that the district wants to spray and the other environmental toxins in our environment all at the same time? So that is what's happening when the district wants to spray Naled and Pyrethroids at the same time. It's a double whammy. And they do real harm. And those hazards are not addressed in the EPA reviews. They don't look at synergistic or cumulative effects of these poisons. They just look at one big dose. Does it kill you or not? And if not quite, then it gets approval. The EPA has actually approved 85 pesticides that are banned in most other countries, including the Naled that they want to use in this proposal and they currently use. And all of these agents are banned for private use because they're just too toxic, too harmful, and people are going to be seriously maimed and killed if they try to use these regularly in their own homes. So it's been 60 years since Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, and still government agencies in Utah are putting deadly chemicals in our environment with little to no thought about the cumulative negative impact of these chemicals on our communities, or the fact that they're just not even effective. They don't have a major impact on the reduction of West Nile virus. And let's face it, mosquitoes are really annoying. And that's a lot of the reason why people want to spray for them. And it doesn't reduce that annoyance. They're still there in the same numbers as they've ever been. The more effective the spray, the more likely it is to drift away from the target area and into nearby neighborhoods. If a chemical dose is enough to kill millions of mosquitoes, repeated applications of that poison are likely to be enough to harm a fetus. The aphorism, death by 1,000 cuts, shouldn't mean no one is responsible. It means that we're all responsible, and the little things that we do make big differences. It is up to all of us to put an end to the poisoning of our environment with aerial spraying of adult mosquito pesticides. Thanks for your attention. Now I'm going to pass you off to Dr. Tom Nelson, who is our emergency medicine physician. Thanks, Dr. Nelson.
Thanks so much, Courtney. As mentioned, I'm Tom Nelson. I'm an ER physician in Salt Lake City. and I'm a board member of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. And I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to talk about this important topic. Pesticide spraying over the northwest quadrant has a much larger impact on air quality than the public or the Salt Lake Mosquito Abatement District appreciates. The district has even implied that aerial pesticide spraying does not affect human health. They have asserted that this type of spraying, quote, would not exceed local standards for air emissions and would not result in non-conformance with the Clean Air Act, unquote, when in fact there are proven adverse health consequences from spraying. I'd like to start by establishing that pesticide mixtures contain solvents that release high rates of volatile organic compounds. And from now on, I'll just refer to those as VOCs. Studies have shown VOCs in the air and soil increase significantly after pesticide spraying, and levels of these harmful compounds don't return to pre-spray baseline levels for 1 to 2 days. It's also important to understand that VOCs are a precursor of ozone and will serve as a significant source of summertime ozone. Furthermore, spraying for mosquitoes happens in summer and early fall when warm temperatures enhance the volatilization of VOCs and thereby allow VOCs to increase ozone as well. So to reiterate, these pesticides release VOCs, they increase ozone levels every time that spraying occurs. Unfortunately for Utahns, this will result in poorer air quality. And when spraying occurs multiple times in the summer, that means our air quality is made worse for weeks out of the year. Utah is already struggling with high summertime ozone levels statewide. Some rural parts of our state are experiencing higher summertime levels of ozone than the Los Angeles basin. The VOCs from spraying pesticides increases ozone levels locally, as well as at sites remote from the sprayed area, as ozone can form hundreds of miles from where the precursors are released. And the detrimental health consequences from ozone and VOCs are significant. Studies show that episodes of elevated VOCs and ozone during a several-week period represent a risk to fetal development and viability for exposed pregnant mothers. Further research has shown that both chronic and acute ozone exposure increases stillbirth risk. Additionally, the consequences of spraying, including ozone and VOCs, precipitate an immediate inflammatory response in the body that takes days or weeks to fully subside. And this inflammatory response can contribute to significant clinical consequences such as heart attacks, strokes, and increased mortality in general. There's a wealth of additional research showing that VOCs are one of the most hazardous components of urban and industrial air pollution. These VOCs are potent carcinogens, reproductive toxins, and neurotoxins. Recognizing the significant harms, VOCs of all sources have been a prominent part of the Utah Division of Air Quality's strategy to improve Utah's air quality. With regards to mosquito spraying, because the release of these VOCs is from a mobile source, not a stationary source, the DAQ does not require a permit for their spraying. In addition to the health consequences of spraying, there are other issues with the district's assertion that spraying, quote, would not exceed local standards for air admissions and would not result in non-conformance with the Clean Air Act, unquote. First, there is no local standard for VOCs. Neither is there a state or federal standard for VOCs, even though there should be. Next, VOC emissions from the spraying and ozone spikes will occur during wildfire season, which we are now consistently experiencing, and when we experience some of our worst air quality of the year. The addition of VOCs to an already unhealthy backdrop of wildfire pollution will make a bad situation even worse. Finally, there's also the issue of environmental justice. Salt Lake communities that are on the west side, North Salt Lake and West Bountiful, near the airport, near oil refineries, near the major freeways, and soon to be neighbors of the inland port are already at significantly increased risk and are already victims of environmental injustice. Multiple events of aerial pesticide spraying would add to the already disproportionate toxic air pollution burden borne by the nearby residents of the west side, North Salt Lake and Bountiful. Pesticide spraying from the district in the northwest quadrant will make that even worse, as pesticides are at the top of the list of environmental neurotoxins. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tom. I'm just going to wrap it up really quick now. As long as there is a Great Salt Lake and its wetlands, there will be mosquitoes because that is their natural habitat. Spraying pesticides in a vain attempt to wipe them out is not just pointless, but actually makes the situation worse and is hazardous to public health. It adds yet another layer of environmental injustice upon tens of thousands of people who live on the west side, North Salt Lake and West Bountiful, especially upon the children who will be born in that area for decades to come. While mosquito toxins may be responsible for only a fraction of all the toxins our children are exposed to, any attempt to justify a specific source of toxins as being only a small part of the total problem is indefensible. I repeat the words of Dr. Henley. The aphorism, death by 1,000 cuts, shouldn't mean no one is responsible. It should mean everyone is, and that everyone must stop contributing to the problem, including the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District. Thank you. We'll now entertain questions.
So it looks like we have a question from Deseret News. What would UPHE recommend to the public to protect themselves as they wait for the democratic process to change the use of aerial spraying and pesticides?
Let me weigh in on that. The most important way to protect yourself is to decrease or eliminate, where possible, all standing water near your property. Most of the biting that any particular resident or even neighborhood experiences comes from mosquitoes that actually breed in their own area. Very few of those mosquito bites come from mosquitoes that are hundreds of yards away and certainly miles away. So the best thing that any resident can do is to eliminate breeding sites on their own property or places where that they frequent.
Then the next question is, where can the public find these studies that were referenced in the conference to introduce to their local city, county, and state representatives?
Our 60+ page report is available publicly on our website, and we would be happy to send a PDF copy to any member of the media that's willing to wade through it all. There are about 260 references, and most of those are medical studies that are pertinent to this issue, and we'd be happy to forward that to anyone who's willing to read it. And we certainly hope a lot of people are, actually.
And I
wonder if the first part of that question, if the Deseret was wondering how to prevent exposure to these aerial pesticides. And I'll just throw in there, I mean, we didn't even know that these things are being sprayed. So there's no way to protect yourself if you don't know when the spraying is occurring. So I would immediately reach out to my city council, my county council, any of my government representatives. I need to know if they're spraying this aerial pesticide within 5 miles of my home. I need to know 24 hours in advance so that I can stay indoors, so that I can keep my children indoors, so I can keep my pets indoors, and probably for 24 hours afterwards. But I'm sure there's more expertise on answering that question.
It's pretty hard to leave town for 3 months if you don't know when it's happening or what's happening. It's just discovered by us recently that it's been happening for a long time, unbeknownst to us.
Let me add to that we asked the Mosquito Abatement District whether or not they make any attempt to warn the public before they spray, or to clear out any people that are working or duck hunting in the area. And they said they do not. In other words, anybody who happens to be underneath these planes is going to be exposed directly to low-flying airplanes spraying these pesticides. When we challenged them on the appropriateness of that, they said, well, the EPA says it's safe enough, so we don't need to. And we vigorously dispute that. In fact, in the literature, there is one example prominently cited where a teenager was exposed to one of these same pesticides in exactly the same way, and it actually caused his blindness. Now, we're not expecting that kind of an outcome of anyone who is so exposed, but that speaks to the issue of some people can be much more susceptible to a very serious outcome from these pesticides than the population in general. But in our view, it is not appropriate for anybody in the population, no matter what their susceptibility is, to be directly exposed to this spraying, and yet that is exactly what has been happening.
So we have a question. Does spraying indoors fully prevent, does staying indoors fully prevent the harmful effects of spraying, or are people still at some risk?
The answer to that is they are definitely still at some risk, because the pesticides will seep indoors. And in fact, once indoors, the pesticide chemicals do not degrade in sunlight like they do outside. So in fact, the amount of chemicals that seeps inside a person's house can remain on all the surfaces inside the house, countertops, carpets, walls. And obviously children are the ones who are in that circumstance the most susceptible to further contact with these chemicals. So the short answer is no, staying indoors is helpful, but is certainly not enough. And that is all the more the case with children.
Children have much more hand-to-mouth contact, and they're on the floor a lot more, so they're exposed. And then those are the people that we don't want exposed even more.
Any other questions that we can answer from the press? So Brian, maybe you can just restate the ask here. What do we want?
We're asking quite bluntly that the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District stop aerial spraying of pesticides. That is our primary concern right now. But for all the same reasons, we would say we are also asking them to stop spraying, period, from trucks and from backpacks. The spraying isn't helping, and it is causing the harms as we've outlined today. But there is particular concern about aerial spraying. We would like all the spraying to cease. And for that matter, we could say the same thing about every other mosquito abatement district in the state. But our primary concern is aerial spraying, but all these considerations are probably equally applicable to other types of spraying from trucks and from backpacks.
Great, thank you for that. If there's any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in or put them in the chat. Some of our doctors will be available later this afternoon if you need any follow-ups or one-on-ones. Just reach out to myself or Dr. Moench, and we're happy to do that. And if you would like a PDF copy of the report, just email me. Otherwise, the report is posted on our website under issues. And Brian, do you have anything else, or should we call it?
Our website is uphe.org, so you can obtain a copy there, or we'd be happy to send you a PDF copy of it through email.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, thank you everybody for coming out and attending and listening to this very important issue, and we appreciate it. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.